All right, thank you. So yeah, my name is Youssef. I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and this is the fourth application of this way of looking at how the built environment is designed. No disclosures, just to put that right at the front. And a little overview of what I'll be talking about. First, the origin story of where this through the eyes of the user idea came from, and then some quick numbers and statistics on disability, where this project came from, and this functional scenarios method that we've been applying on various settings. And we'll go through why we did them in these places and why they matter. And then some implications, and actually a lot of the future work part has been influenced by what I've been seeing here the past 3 days, since this is about shared behavioral outcomes. I've been very moved by it. So the origin of Through the Eyes of the User was actually with 3 colleagues from Atlanta, and it was at a pediatric cancer center, the AFLAC Pediatric, I think it's Oncology and Blood Disorder Center, if I'm correct. And what we did is we designed these little passports that the kids took with them through the clinic, what they called their journey through the center. And it was a way for us to not just empower the kids to take ownership of giving us data that would be useful to help them, but it was also to have them be partners with us. They informed the research. They informed what we went to the C-suite with afterwards, saying, this is where your money needs to go. This is what your kids need. This is where the bottlenecks are happening. And this is where they're feeling frightened or excited or happy or calm. And we presented this at Healthcare Design a couple of years ago, and the feedback was great. Everyone was really excited about it. And to bring it back to Part 4. There was a shift that happened in the 60s with how disabilities were viewed. Before the 60s, it was an individual that was inherently disabled. It was an issue in them. After the 60s, and this is not perfect yet, it's when the environment started being addressed or acknowledged as it being what causes the disability. An individual is not disabled. It's the environment that disables them. If everything in the world was in Braille, we would all be disabled, right? And with that happening in the 60s, there is still an issue of young adults with disabilities that have nowhere to go. We still acknowledge that the built environment is the problem, but why is it that 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds with cerebral palsy have to move into nursing homes? So let's move on to the numbers. Around 20% of the US population has a disability, or is considered as an individual living with a disability, and that includes vision, that includes auditory, that includes motor, that includes speech. And so of that, 56 million, 30 million are to do with moving, and 20 million to do with lifting and grasping and dexterity. Around 10%, a little more than 10%, are between 25 and 44. And this is specifically where this Part 4 of the study was focused on. So 15% of nursing homes are under the age of 65, and that's astounding. There are all these needs that can't be met for a 30-year-old, for a 40-year-old in a nursing home. So there are a few housing options that meet or support their social and participatory needs. Everyone in their environment doesn't really fit in within their peer group, right? And the options they have are limited to their parents' homes. And what's happening with this demographic is, with shifts in medicine, they're able to live longer and outlive their parents. Their parents are no longer able to support them in their homes because they're aging. So that first option, living in their parents' home, is becoming more difficult. And they are starting to move into nursing homes. That's great because it provides them the assistance with activity that they need, but that's not the only reason we are alive. We're not just here to eat, to move, to work. There are all these social needs that aren't being met, all these participatory needs that can't be met in a nursing home. And then there are these rare one-off buildings. And there's one in Philadelphia for young adults on the autism spectrum, where the design of the space really helps them with their day-to-day life. And this Part 4 came out of one of these buildings that's being designed in Atlanta right now. So Champions Place Foundation. It's this organization for young adults that are transitioning out of high school and into the community, into the workforce, that have limited mobility or limited communication due to neurological disorders like cerebral palsy and spina bifida, or even some were from accidents. And the way they were approaching it is that today there are all these issues with how a young adult lives with a disability, and their vision is to shift that over. It's to start to secure their future, for them to have access to public transportation from their home, to go to where they work on their own, access to the mall to go shopping because you're a 30-year-old and you want to do that, access to social activity where you leaving your home is not that difficult. So how do you design an environment like that? They partnered with Georgia Tech, and this was a studio that I taught, where 10 students designed their version of this apartment building. And part of that was spending a lot of time with the members of this community. We did some home visits where not yet for that. We visited some homes where they live with their parents, where we picked up on how they were changing their environment to better accommodate their needs. And we just spent a lot of time together really trying to see their perspective of it, really trying to understand what they need from their environment for us to design it better. And so I turned that into a study that has been part of my PhD the past couple of years. So understanding what it is about the built environment that either supports or frustrates their needs, and trying to explore how this, I guess, through the eyes of the user, functional scenario method applies to them. So a survey, I'm more interested in talking about the functional scenarios, which is this method that I've been applying on different environments. And the idea is that it's breaking it down into very literally, this is the user and this is what they need. In an independent living facility, it was looking at what the social needs were and what the choice and autonomy needs were that were being blocked by the environment, and how do you support that? In a neonatal intensive care unit, it was comparing the needs of physicians, the needs of nurses, the needs of the babies, and the needs of family members to understand where they overlap or where they are in contrast, not in contrast, in conflict with one another, I'm sorry. And in this case, it was looking at how the design of the built environment can support or hinder someone's needs. So let's move on to some of these home visits and trying to understand these little components of the space. So for example, having a sink right up against the bathroom wall prevented someone who was right-handed helping them shave. These very little things they're not really addressed in design guidelines because those guidelines are kind of arbitrary. They're not really addressed through the eyes of the user. They're a group of people that came together and made them up. Even where handrails are placed in bathrooms, they don't really work very well. But since we're short on time, I'm going to skip ahead to the survey and what we tried to get from that, trying to understand what do you need to do independently and what do you need assistance with, and how much does that impact your quality of life. And from there, we learned that there were 17 activities that seemed to be really important, and they fell into 4 major architectural categories. So visibility, connectivity, distance, and space. And there was some touching on space syntax yesterday and the day before, some talk about depth map, but it was really trying to apply these metrics of how space is built or how space is measured on how you analyze its effectiveness. With connectivity, trying to understand, do you have access to your own private entrance? Do you need to go through a lobby and go through a series of security checks before you're in your own space? With distance, how many social spaces are you going to be going through, and how many serendipitous encounters will you have with your neighbors? In space, do you have your own private space that's outdoors, or do you get to share it with your community? What do those numbers mean? How do they impact these social outcomes that affect stress, that affect isolation, that affect depression and anxiety? And that had to be a lot briefer than I expected, so thank you for listening.
As brief as it was, it's an important population, so I'm wondering whether there are any questions. We have time for one. All right, in the back, can you take that?
I'll just make a quick comment. I do thank you for your presentation. I think I listened to a TED Talk the other day, and the gentleman was blind, but he has become blind that had practiced and then lost his sight at 30, and talked about how rich his experience was now because his sight had overtaken all of his other senses. And his comment was that we all have disabilities, but we just haven't discovered them yet. So
That is a
it's
great comment. Yeah,
nice
absolutely.
to reflect on.
Thank you.
Great.